The galaxy was old. It had seen empires rise and fall like waves upon a shore. It had watched species discover fire, then steel, then the stars themselves. 2,000 sentient races called it home, spread across 1,000,000 worlds, connected by trade routes and treaties that had taken 10,000 years to build. And at the heart of it all sat the Galactic Council on Nexus Prime, a station the size of a small moon, where representatives from every corner of known space gathered to argue, negotiate, and occasionally threaten each other in the name of peace. The laws of the Galactic Federation numbered exactly 10,000. They covered everything from trade disputes to weapons of mass destruction. They filled databases that would take a human lifetime to read. But every child in the galaxy, no matter what world they called home, knew the first law by heart. Do not harm the children of Earth. It was carved into stone monuments on ancient worlds. It was taught in schools across the stars. It was whispered in the halls of power whenever someone suggested that perhaps humanity had grown weak, that perhaps the old stories were exaggerated, that perhaps it was time for a change. Ambassador Lisa had spent 40 years serving humanity among the stars. She was 63 years old now. With gray hair she refused to dye and eyes that had seen too much. She stood at the observation window of her quarters on Nexus Prime, watching ships come and go like fireflies in the endless dark. She remembered the day the first law was written. She had been 23 then, a junior aide barely important enough to carry documents. Her son had been 5 years old, living with his father on the Luna 7 colony. She remembered getting the call that changed everything. They had taken 43 children from the colony school. They had wanted leverage in a trade negotiation, believing that the soft, short-lived humans would do anything to get their offspring back. They had been right about that last part. They had been very, very wrong about what anything meant. Lisa's son had been among the taken. 18 months later, the Empire no longer existed. Not destroyed in anger, but dismantled piece by piece with cold, methodical precision. Their fleet was scrap metal. Their leaders were prisoners. Their population, once numbering in the billions, was reduced to less than 50,000 survivors who were forbidden from ever leaving there again. Lisa's son had come home, so had 41 of the other children. 2 had not survived the initial taking. The humans made sure the galaxy knew every detail of those 2 deaths. They made sure no one would ever forget. The first law was written the following year. No species had objected. That had been 40 years ago. Lisa was a grandmother now. Her son had grown up, married, had children of his own. The galaxy had known peace, more or less. The first law had never been tested again. Until now. Counselor of the Dominion was a creature of scales and ambition. His species had evolved on a harsh world where only the strong survived. They had clawed their way into space through determination and ruthlessness, and they resented the soft mammals from Earth who seemed to command such fear and respect without earning it. Had spent decades building his coalition in secret, though with their hive minds and endless soldiers, whose ships were fast and deadly. A dozen smaller species who felt overshadowed by humanity's presence, who believed the first law was an insult to their dignity. In private chambers far from prying eyes, spoke to his allies with confidence. The humans are not what they once were, he said, his forked tongue tasting the air. 3 centuries of peace have made them soft. They build gardens where they once built warships. They write poetry where they once wrote battle plans. The warriors who broke thee are dead and gone. The first law still stands, one of his allies said nervously. Laws are words, replied. Words written by the fearful. I propose we remind the galaxy that the bow to no one, that the era of human dominance is over. The plan was simple. A human colony called Haven's Rest hosted an annual children's festival. Families from across human space gathered there each year to celebrate. Thousands of children in one place, protected only by local security, a perfect target. Forces would strike under the cover of a fabricated legal dispute. They would take children as hostages, just as they had done. But this time, when humanity responded with their legendary fury, the coalition would be ready. They would crush the human fleet and shatter the myth forever. And if the myths are true, someone asked, if the humans are everything the old stories claim, laughed a hissing sound that echoed in the chamber. Stories grow in the telling. They were weak, their empire already crumbling. The humans simply took credit for what time would have done anyway. Trust me, my friends, this is our moment. On the other side of the galaxy, Captain Jake sat in his cabin aboard the Steadfast Hope, reading a message from his wife. Their daughter Emma had lost her first tooth. Their son Tyler had scored the winning goal in his school's soccer match. Normal things, family things, the things that made the long months in space bearable. Jake was 45 years old, a career diplomat who had never fired a weapon in anger. He ambassadors and negotiators across the stars, solving problems with words instead of weapons. He believed in peace. He believed in the good that the Galactic Federation could do. He had no idea that in 3 weeks, everything would change. Admiral Cole was 87 years old, kept alive by the best medicine humanity could offer. He had led the fleet against the 4 decades ago. He had given the orders that broke an empire. He had held the children in his arms when they came home, and he had wept in private for the 2 who did not. He was supposed to be retired. He was supposed to be tending his garden on the coast of what used to be California, but he still received the intelligence briefings. He still watched the patterns of power shift across the galaxy. And lately, something had been making him uneasy. Ships moving in unusual patterns, communications encrypted with methods his people could not break, whispers of meetings in dark places. Cole had learned long ago to trust his instincts. They had kept him alive through 3 wars and countless skirmishes, and right now, his instincts were screaming that something terrible was coming. He just did not know what, not yet. But he would. The galaxy was about to remember why the first law existed, and Cole would be there to remind them. Haven's Rest was a beautiful world. Green hills rolled toward purple mountains under a sky that shifted from blue to gold as the twin suns moved overhead. The colony had been founded 200 years ago by settlers who wanted a quiet place to raise their families, far from the busy core worlds. Every year, during the Festival of Stars, families came from across human space to celebrate. The fields outside the main settlement filled with tents and laughter. Children ran between game booths and food stalls. Parents watched with tired smiles as their kids played together under alien constellations. This year, over 8,000 children had come to Haven's Rest. They had no idea what was about to happen. Danny was 10 years old. He had brown hair that never stayed flat and a gap between his front teeth that his mother said made him look like a pirate. He held his little sister Lily's hand as they walked through the festival grounds, looking for the booth that sold the sticky sweet cakes their grandmother used to make. "Danny, I'm tired," Lily said. She was only 6 and her legs were shorter than his. "Just a little more," Danny promised. "I'll carry you back, okay?" He never got the chance. The first explosions came from the east near the landing pads. Danny felt the ground shake beneath his feet. He saw adults turn toward the sound, confusion on their faces. Then the screaming started. Ships descended from the sky like angry insects. They were not human ships. Danny had seen enough movies to recognize alien designs. These were dark and sharp, built for war. Soldiers poured out of the ships before they even touched the ground. They wore armor that gleamed under the twin suns. They carried weapons that fired bolts of blue light. Danny did not think. He grabbed Lily and ran. Around him, the festival descended into chaos. Parents scooped up children and fled in every direction. Security officers outnumbered and tried to form defensive lines. They fell one by one, but they bought precious seconds for others to escape. Brooks had been a teacher for 15 years. She had brought her class of 23 students to the festival as a reward for their hard work. When the attack began, she gathered them together and led them toward the emergency shelters. She almost made it. A squad of alien soldiers appeared in front of them, blocking the path, pushed her students behind her and raised her hands. "Please," she said, "they're just children, let them go." The soldier in front tilted his head, studying her with cold, reptilian eyes. Then he spoke into a communicator on his wrist. A moment later, a larger transport descended nearby. "The children come with us," the soldier said in broken human language. "You are not needed." Brooks knew what that meant. She had about 3 seconds to act. She turned to her students. "When I say run, you run to the shelter. Don't look back, don't stop for anything." Then she threw herself at the nearest soldier. She was not a fighter. She was a teacher who liked books and gardening and quiet evenings with her cat. But she was also human, and humans protected their children. The soldiers killed her in less than 5 seconds. But in those 5 seconds, 18 of her 23 students escaped into the chaos. The other 5 were taken. Danny found a cargo container near the storage depot. It was dark inside and smelled like machine oil, but there was room for a small person to hide. "Lily, listen to me," he said, kneeling to look his sister in the eyes. "I need you to stay in here and be very, very quiet. Don't come out until you hear Mom or Dad okay." Lily's eyes were wide with fear. "Danny, I'm scared." "I know, me too, but you have to be brave. Can you do that for me?" She nodded, tears running down her cheeks. Danny hugged her tight, then helped her climb into the container. He pulled off his jacket and wrapped it around her. "Remember, stay quiet. I'll come back for you." He never got the chance. He was 10 steps away when the soldiers found him. They grabbed him roughly and dragged him toward a waiting transport. Danny did not scream. He did not want to lead them back to Lily. In the end, 347 children died in the attack on Haven's Rest. Another 1,200 were taken aboard coalition ships and carried into the dark between stars. The colony's main communication array was destroyed in the first minutes of the assault, cutting them off from the rest of human space. But Sheriff was a stubborn man. He was dying. He knew that. The blue bolt had taken him in the chest, and he could feel his life fatting with each breath. But he had been Sheriff of Haven's Rest for 20 years, and he was not going to let these monsters get away with what they had done. He crawled through the burning wreckage of his office until he found what he was looking for. An old emergency beacon, the kind they had used before the faster-than-light communications were built. It was supposed to be a museum piece. Made it work. With his last strength, he activated the beacon and sent a message into the void. Just 3 words, repeating over and over. "Children taken, help." Then he closed his eyes and let go. 3 days later, a battered rescue ship limped into Mars Station. It had escaped Haven's Rest in the chaos, carrying 38 children and a handful of adults. Lily was among them, still clutching her brother's jacket. The authorities were gentle with her. They gave her warm food and a soft blanket. They let her rest before asking questions, but eventually they needed to know what had happened. Lily told them everything. She told them about the ships and the soldiers. She told them about the screaming and the fire. She told them about her brother pushing her into the container and promising to come back. She told them he never did. Within hours, the news spread across every human world. The galaxy waited, holding its breath, wondering what would happen next. Counselor broadcast his message on all channels. He claimed the action was legal under some obscure Federation statute. He demanded humanity accept the new reality. He spoke with confidence and certainty. Ambassador Lisa requested time to address the Galactic Council. The request was granted. She walked to the center of the Great Chamber, surrounded by representatives from 2,000 species. Every eye was upon her. The silence was absolute. Lisa thought of her son, taken 40 years ago. She thought of her, safe on Earth but vulnerable to a galaxy that had just proven it could forget. She thought of Danny and the 1,199 other children somewhere in the dark, waiting to be rescued. When she spoke, her voice was steady. "You have made a terrible mistake." Then she turned and walked out without another word. The galaxy had expected rage. They had expected threats and demands. The silence was far more terrifying. The galaxy had seen many things in its long history. It had seen wars that burned whole star systems. It had seen plagues that wiped out entire species. It had seen empires collapse and civilizations vanish into dust. But it had never seen anything quite like what happened in the days after Haven's rest. Humanity went silent. Every human world stopped transmitting. Trade ships turned around mid-journey and went home. Embassies closed their doors. Diplomats packed their belongings and left without explanation. Within 24 hours, it was as if humanity had simply vanished from the galactic stage. The effect was immediate and unsettling. On Nexus Prime, alien merchants who had done business with humans for generations found their contracts suddenly worthless. Scientists working on joint projects arrived at their labs to find their human colleagues gone. Communication channels that had been active for centuries went dead. "What are they doing?" Counselor demanded at an emergency session. "Why are they not responding? Why are they not threatening, negotiating, attacking?" No one had an answer. On Earth, something was stirring. Admiral Cole had not slept in 3 days. He stood in the command center beneath the Rocky Mountains, watching data flow across screens that covered every wall. Ships were moving. Factories were working. People were answering calls they had hoped would never come. Protocol Omega had been activated for the first time in 200 years. It was not a battle plan. It was something far larger. Every human world had received the same message. Every military officer, every reserve soldier, every retired veteran. The message was simple: the children have been taken. Report for duty. They came. Commander Ben Taylor was 32 years old and had spent his entire career pushing data around logistics networks. He had never expected to matter. But when Protocol Omega activated, he found himself promoted 3 ranks and put in charge of supply chains that would feed the largest military operation in human history. "We're not planning for a battle," Admiral Cole told him. "We're planning for a campaign. I want every ship fueled, every soldier equipped, and every weapon ready. And I want it done in 2 weeks." Ben Taylor had never worked so hard in his life. He did not sleep. He barely ate. He pushed himself and his teams to the breaking point, and somehow, impossibly, they made it happen. Dr. Foster was She had spent her career studying how alien minds worked, what they feared, what they valued, what made them break. When the call came, she was asked a simple question: how do we make them remember? She wrote reports on every species in coalition. She identified their pressure points, their cultural vulnerabilities, their deepest fears. She created plans that would not just defeat them, but haunt them for generations. "We don't want to destroy them," she explained to the admirals. "We want to make sure they never, ever forget why this was a mistake." Sergeant Chris Miller was 67 years old. He had fought in the campaign as a young man. He had carried children out of prison ships and held them while they cried. He had thought those days were behind him. When the message came, he put on his old uniform and reported to the nearest base. They put him in charge of training the new generation. "You think this will be like the simulations," he told the young soldiers who gathered around him. "It won't be. You think you're ready. You're not. But I'm going to make you ready, because out there somewhere 1,200 kids are waiting for us to bring them home, and we don't leave our children behind. Not ever." Across the galaxy, other species watched and wondered. An ancient race who had dealt with humans since first contact quietly moved their fleets away from the Coalition's territory. When asked why, their ambassador simply said, "We remember we choose not to repeat their mistake." A peaceful species known for their telepathic abilities reported strange sensations coming from human space. "Focused," they said. "Unified. We have never felt anything like it. It is as if their entire species has become a single mind with a single purpose." Even within its coalition, cracks were beginning to show. Whose ships were supposed to form the core of the coalition fleet began asking uncomfortable questions. "Where is the human response?" their admiral demanded. "Why are they not behaving as predicted? This silence. It is not the behavior of a soft species. It is the behavior of a predator preparing to strike." "Dismiss these concerns. They are paralyzed with grief," he insisted. "They do not know how to respond. Our victory is assured." But in the quiet of his private chambers felt something he had not felt in many years: doubt. He had expected rage. He had expected hasty attacks that his prepared defenses could repel. He had expected negotiations that would reveal human weakness. Instead, there was only silence and the growing feeling that he had made a terrible miscalculation. 2 weeks after the attack, Ambassador Lisa appeared once again before the Galactic Council. "I bring humanity's terms," she said. Her voice was calm, almost gentle. "You will return every child within 72 hours. You will surrender all individuals responsible for the attack to face trial. You will dissolve the coalition and renounce any claim to the authority that led to this action." "And if we refuse?" asked, trying to keep his voice steady. Lisa looked at him with eyes that held no anger, no hatred, only a cold certainty that made something in his chest tighten. "These are not demands," she said. "They are not threats. They are simply what will happen. The only choice you have is how much suffering comes before we reach that end." "You cannot threaten the coalition," said. "We have the largest fleet in the galaxy. We have 72 hours, Lisa said, "starting now." She left the chamber without waiting for a response, stood before his coalition allies and declared the ultimatum rejected. He spoke of human arrogance and coalition strength. He predicted a swift victory. No one applauded. On Haven's Rest, the twin suns rose over a field of rubble and ash. Somewhere beneath the debris, a memorial flower was already beginning to grow. It was red, the color of human blood, and it pushed toward the sky with stubborn determination. 72 hours began to count down. And in the dark spaces between stars, human ships began to move. Hour 73. Counselor was in his command chamber when the alarms began to sound. He rushed to the viewing screens, expecting to see human ships approaching coalition staging areas, ready to be destroyed by his waiting fleets. Instead, he saw something that made his blood run cold. Human ships had appeared simultaneously at the of every species in his coalition, not attacking, not threatening, just there, hundreds of vessels hanging in orbit like patient wolves, watching and waiting. "How," he whispered, "how did they know where we all live?" The answer, of course, was simple. Humanity had been part of the Galactic Federation for 300 years. They had traded with these species, worked alongside them, shared meals and stories and secrets. They knew everything about their so-called enemies. And now they were using that knowledge. Captain Jake stood on the bridge of the Steadfast Hope, watching the turn beneath them. His ship was a diplomatic vessel, not built for war, but that was the point. "Open a channel to the surface," he ordered, "all frequencies." When the channel opened, Jake spoke calmly, almost kindly. "People of Prime, your government has made a terrible mistake. They have taken our children. We have come to bring them home. You are not our enemies, but your leaders have chosen to become ours. What happens next depends on choices that are not yet made. We encourage you to think carefully about the future you want." Similar messages were broadcast to every coalition world at the same moment. Humanity was not just making war, they were making a point. The campaign that followed was unlike anything the galaxy had seen. Human ships did not attack population centers. They did not bomb cities or slaughter civilians. Instead, they struck with surgical precision at military targets and supply lines. Every action was calculated to demonstrate overwhelming capability while minimizing unnecessary death. But the psychological assault was just as devastating. Dr. Foster's plans were executed perfectly. Coalition communication networks were infiltrated within the first week. Suddenly, every screen on every coalition world displayed images of the children killed at Haven's Rest. Their names, their ages, their faces, frozen forever in school photographs that would have hung on refrigerators and office walls. No words, no accusations, just the faces of the dead looking out at the galaxy that had allowed them to die. Economic systems began to collapse next. Human-backed trade networks support from coalition banks. Currencies crashed. Markets failed. Species that had enjoyed prosperity for generations suddenly found themselves facing poverty. "They're not trying to kill us," one admiral said in desperation. "They're trying to break us." He was right. Within 2 weeks, the coalition fleet had been neutralized. Not destroyed, but rendered helpless. Their supply lines cut, their communications compromised, their crews demoralized. Ships that had once been symbols of power now floated in space, waiting to be captured. And through it all, humanity made sure there were witnesses. They captured coalition officers and treated them with perfect courtesy. They provided food, medical care, and comfortable quarters. They answered questions politely and explained exactly what was happening and why. Then they sent these officers home with messages for their governments. "We are not monsters, we are parents, and you took our children." Captain Jake led the mission to rescue the captives. Operation Homecoming, they called it. 300 Special Forces soldiers, the best humanity had to offer, trained for exactly this kind of operation. Intelligence had located the children on a prison station deep in the Void Nebula, a region of space so dangerous that most species avoided it entirely. The Coalition had thought no one would find them there. They had been wrong. The assault was swift and precise. Human soldiers moved through the station like ghosts, neutralizing guards with weapons set to stun. They were not there for revenge. They were there to bring their children home. Danny heard the fighting from his cell. He had been on the station for 3 weeks, keeping the younger children calm with stories about Earth, about heroes who always came to save the day. He had told those stories so many times that he had almost stopped believing them himself. Then the door to his cell opened, and a human soldier stood there, holding out his hand. "Danny," the soldier asked. Danny nodded, unable to speak. "Your sister Lily is waiting for you on Earth. Let's go home." Danny took the soldier's hand and started to cry. Around him, other doors were opening. Other children were being carried out of their cells, wrapped in blankets, held close by soldiers who wept alongside them. Not a single child was lost in the rescue. Not a single child was left behind. Counselor tried to flee as his coalition crumbled around him. He commandeered a fast ship and ran for the empty spaces between galaxies, hopping to disappear into the void. His own people caught him before he reached the jump point. Facing the destruction of everything their ancestors had built, made a choice. They offered to the humans in exchange for mercy. Admiral Cole received the prisoner personally, stood before him in chains, stripped of his rank and dignity. The reptilian who had once dreamed of reshaping the galaxy could not meet the old human's eyes. "Do it," said. "Execute me and be done with it. I know what your kind does to those who harm their young." Admiral Cole studied him for a long moment. Then he turned and activated a holographic display. Images filled the air around them. Human children playing in parks, running through fields, laughing in classrooms. Children on Earth, on Mars, on 100 colony worlds, living, breathing, innocent lives. "This is what you threatened," Admiral Cole said quietly. "This is what we protect, and this is why you will never threaten it again." He gestured to the guards. "Take him to holding. He will face trial, not execution. We are not what you try to make us." Was led away, confused and broken. The campaign was over. The coalition had fallen. The children were coming home. But the galaxy would remember. They would remember the silence before the storm. They would remember the faces of the dead children on their screens. They would remember the patient, implacable precision with which humanity had dismantled everything their enemies had built. And they would remember why the first law existed. Some species are not to be provoked. Some bonds are not to be broken. Some children are not to be touched. The trials lasted 6 months. Unlike the aftermath of the war, humanity did not seek to destroy the coalition species. They had evolved, grown wiser in the centuries since that terrible reckoning. Vengeance was easy. Justice was harder. They chose the harder path. A joint tribunal was established on Nexus Prime, with judges from both human and neutral alien worlds. The proceedings were broadcast across the galaxy. Every species watched as those responsible for the Haven's Rest massacre faced judgment. Counselor was sentenced to life imprisonment on a barren world at the edge of known space. He would live out his days in comfortable isolation, unable to harm anyone ever again, forced to contemplate what his ambition had cost. The officers who had led the attack received similar sentences. The soldiers who had followed orders were given lighter punishments and mandatory education about the history of the first law. Many of them had not truly understood what they were doing. Ignorance was not an excuse, but it was a reason for mercy. The coalition species themselves were not punished as peoples. Their governments were restructured. Their military capabilities were reduced, but they were allowed to rebuild, to heal, to become better than they had been. "We could have broken them," Ambassador Lisa explained to a gathering of human leaders. "We had the power. We had the right. But broken species become desperate, and desperate species do terrible things. It is better to give them a path forward than to leave them with nothing to lose." Not everyone agreed. There were humans who wanted harsher justice, who remembered the 347 children who would never come home. Their anger was valid, their grief was real, but in the end, the majority chose hope over hatred. The children came home. The ceremony was held on Earth, in a great open field under a clear blue sky. Families who had waited in agony for weeks finally saw their sons and daughters again. The sound of their reunion was unlike anything the galaxy had ever heard. Joy and relief and love and grief, all mixed together in a chorus of human emotion. Danny walked off the transport ship holding his mother's hand on one side and his father's on the other. He was thinner than when he had left, and there was something older in his eyes. But when he saw Lily running toward him, her arms outstretched, that older something melted away. He caught her and held her tight, burying his face in her hair. "I told you I'd come back," he whispered. "I told you." Lily just held on to him, and did not let go for a very long time. Not all reunions were happy. Some families had empty places that would never be filled. The parents of the 347 children who died at Haven's Rest attended the ceremony too, holding photographs of sons and daughters they would never see again. The galaxy watched as these parents were honored, their loss acknowledged, their children remembered. In the months that followed, humanity began to change in subtle ways. Captain Jake returned to his family and requested a permanent desk assignment. "I've seen enough of the stars," he told his commanding officer. "I want to watch my kids grow up." His request was granted without question. Admiral Cole oversaw the creation of a new rapid response force, positioned to respond to any threat to human children anywhere in the galaxy within hours instead of days. He hoped it would never be needed. He knew it probably would be. Dr. Foster wrote a book about the crisis, analyzing the psychology of both the Coalition and humanity's response. It became required reading at diplomatic academies across known space. She dedicated it to Brooks and the other adults who had died protecting the children of Haven's Rest. Commander Ben Taylor was promoted again and put in charge of a new logistics network designed to support humanitarian operations anywhere in the galaxy. He had discovered a talent he never knew he had, and he was determined to use it for good. Ambassador Lisa retired at last, 70 years after that terrible day when her own son had been taken. She returned to Earth and spent her remaining years surrounded by her, telling them stories of the stars and the importance of protecting what matters most. The first law was strengthened in the years after the crisis. New enforcement mechanisms were added, new consequences. But more importantly, the understanding of why the law existed had changed. A Nexus historian named spent years studying the events. He was a member of a species that had been neutral throughout the crisis, and he approached the subject with academic curiosity rather than personal involvement. His conclusion surprised many. For centuries, he wrote, the galaxy believed the first law existed because humans were dangerous. We feared what they might do if provoked. This fear was not wrong, but it was incomplete. The truth is simpler and more profound. Humans protect their children not because they are warriors, but because they love. They are warriors because they protect. The distinction matters. Other species love their offspring, of course, but human love has a particular quality. It is fierce and absolute and unconditional. It does not calculate cost and benefit. It does not consider strategic advantage. It simply acts with every resource available until the threat is ended. This is not a weakness. This is not primitive emotion. This is the foundation of everything humanity has built. Their colonies, their culture, their place among the stars, all of it grows from this single truth. They will do anything to keep their children safe. The Coalition forgot this. The galaxy must not forget again. On Haven's Rest, the colony was rebuilt over the course of 5 years. The fields where children had once played at the Festival of Stars were green again, filled with laughter and joy. A new generation grew up there, watched over by parents who remembered and survivors who had returned. At the center of the rebuilt settlement stood a memorial. It was simple in design, a circle of white stone with the names of the 347 children carved into its surface. In the middle of the circle grew a garden of red flowers, the same kind that had pushed up through the rubble in the days after the attack. The inscription on the memorial reads simply, "They came home." Years later, a young alien student asked her teacher why the first law existed. The teacher was a member of the species that had been broken 2 centuries earlier for the same crime. She was old now, one of the last who remembered what her people had once been. She looked at her student with ancient eyes and answered simply, "Because the humans taught the galaxy that some things are sacred, and the cost of forgetting is too high to pay." Far across the void on a dozen human worlds, children played under alien suns. They did not know about the first law. They did not know about the wars fought in their name. They knew only that they were loved, that they were protected, that they were safe. And somewhere in the dark between stars, the galaxy remembered. It would not forget again.